Before we start, if you'd like additional resources, be sure to check out the installation instructions as well as this original Boston Whaler diagram, both available from Specialty Marine's website. First things first, let's pull out the three components that make up the rub rail kit. There's the first component, the bottom component, the small flexible rubber L-shaped trim. In the original diagram, this is referred to as the flexible vinyl, part A. Second, we have the rigid receiver, which is made of hard plastic. In the original diagram, this is referred to as the rigid vinyl, or part B. Lastly, we have the flexible rubber insert, which in the original diagram is referred to as the rub rail, or part C. So let's begin by taking a look at installing the flexible L trim. The steps here are very simple and not permanent, so you can perform this step as many times as you like until you're happy with the result. The goal is to temporarily hold the trim in place against the edge of the gunnel, and to do this, you can use masking tape spaced in regular intervals of 10 inches to hold it. Masking tape is helpful here as it will not leave residue upon its removal. The orientation of the trim on the gunnel is as follows. If we imagine this trim as an L shape, place the longer side of the L on top of the gunnel, and the short side wrapped around the edge. Stretch the trim taut around the boat as you tape it in order to remove any wrinkles that appear. When you are finished and the component is held in place, you can cut off the ends so that it's flat with the transom. You won't be needing any extra on the ends. So let me go ahead and show you what the results look like. We're just taking that first piece that sits on the bottom and pretty much just clamping it to the side here. And as you can see, we have some tape on it, but really it's the second piece that's going to nail it in. So that's all set, ready to go. Another important thing to mention is that this installation is done best with two people. I want to show why that is the case as my dad and I work to uncoil this rigid receiver. This component is wound extremely tight. You can see I'm holding the coil with both hands and having my dad cut the tape free to allow it to slowly unravel. You can also see we are doing this on grass so that if the component hits the ground it will not be scratched. One thing I would suggest looking back is to attempt to install this receiver bit by bit, uncoiling it a little as you work around the boat. You will see what I mean in a minute, but my dad and I made the mistake of trying to work with too much of this receiver at a time, and it's much more manageable, albeit more time consuming, to do the installation in small sections. So the next item on the list is to get this rigid receiver installed. What you will need to start are clamps. Having 4 to 6 of these will be best. Screw clamps, quick release clamps, or bar clamps will do. You'll also need a rivet gun and a drill with a 13/64 inch drill bit. The rivets themselves come with the rub rail kit. It is also very helpful and highly recommended to have a heat gun and a sealant. We used 3M Marine Adhesive Sealant Fast Cure 4200. As I am filming and holding the coiled up receiver, my dad has used clamps to get the receiver to be held tightly against the L-shaped trim. As we move along, bit by bit, we are taking the tape off the trim. Now I did leave the receiver out in the sun for a day, but it just wasn't warm enough to make any significant difference in how easy it would be to work with. So a heat gun is definitely useful to help it get taut against the boat, so the clamps can hold it in an optimal position. We made sure to keep the heat gun on its lowest setting, not to spend too much time heating any one spot, and to give it plenty of space between the gun and the component to avoid melting the plastic. Once the receiver was workable enough, we could clamp it down. This is just a quick view to show what a second person could do in this step. I am holding the coil so that it isn't being damaged by the ground, and assisting in keeping the receiver taut while it's being heated and clamps are put on. But again to note, my dad and I could have done this earlier section better if we had just worked with less of it at a time. Using an electric drill with a 13/64 inch drill bit, we start from the beginning of the L trim and space these holes every 6 inches except for around the bow where it curves. Those holes should be close together around 3 to 4 inches. With the hole drilled, we are ready for the marine adhesive and the rivet. Put enough adhesive in the hole to fill it, but not too much that it is leaking out. And with that, we can insert the rivet into the rivet gun. The narrow portion goes into the gun, while the wider end is put into the drill hole. Ensure that the rivet is not on an angle when it is inserted, or you might risk situating the receiver awkwardly and it won't look right. While pulling the trigger of the rivet gun, apply pressure on the rivet into the boat to make sure it is tight against the gunnel and nicely secured. If you are not happy with the result, you can use one of two methods to try again. 1. Drill out the rivet using the same 13/64 inch drill bit, or 2. What we did, use a small oscillating saw underneath the receiver to cut the rivet and pull it out. Again, space these rivets out every 6 inches except for around the bow, where the gap between them should be 3 to 4 inches. With that, the receiver should be secured nicely against the gunnel, And just like with the trim, you can cut the ends of the receiver so that it is flat and even with the back of the boat. Just for some review, I'm going to talk through this POV as I insert this next rivet. You can see we've drilled the hole 6 inches away from the last rivet. There's some adhesive in the hole. I'm pressing against the gunnel as I pull the trigger here. Our gun was a little awkward, so I had to do this motion to actually get the rivet to pop off. But now we can move on to the next section of the receiver. However, I will recommend again to work with smaller sections. We're using the heat gun here. You can see it'll start to make the receiver be more flat against the boat, and that way we can clamp it down. We'll use 2 clamps here to start with, but I'll go ahead once it's in and make sure it's lying flat against the gunnel. I notice that maybe it's rising a little bit, so I'm going to adjust this clamp, make it a little bit more tighter. I'll go ahead and grab another one, and I'll even clamp the top and bottom here as well, just to help it lie secure against the boat. And with that, it should be ready for the next rivet. Before we talk about the insert, if you plan on running a bow light cable through the rub rail, here are some additional details. The size of the cable does not matter here as long as you have enough, because it can always be cut down. However, we did opt to use marine tinned double duplex for our cable type, in order to protect it from oxidation and other environmental factors. At the bow, we cut a hole through the receiver and into where the original wiring came up into the light. It is now time for the insert. One thing to note is to leave yourself at least 2.5 or 3 inches on either side of the boat, because unlike the first 2 components, this will need to be wrapped around the back of the boat. The best practice here is to get one side of the insert clicked into the receiver and then the other side as you work around. So here my dad is pressing in the top part first and then the bottom part. Once both sides are clicked in and you've done the entire length of the boat by hand, you can make sure everything is firmly in place by taking them out and tapping the insert. A very important trick here is that our mallet has black rubber and could be dirty. To protect the white rub rail, we put white tape over the mallet, and this prevented any rubber marks from appearing while we did the tapping. For the ends of the insert, you will need a sharp box cutter, razor, etc., and optionally some fine sandpaper. There is no set length, but cut the ends to a size you are comfortable with, as long as there is enough to wrap it around. Then cut the hook portions of the inner side of the insert that were used to clip into place of the receiver. This way the back of the insert should now be flat where it wraps around. Then round off the ends by cutting them, and optionally use some fine sandpaper to soften the edges. Lastly, drill a hole with a 1/8 inch drill bit through the insert and into the transom, approximately 3/8 inches away from the end of the insert. Then using the screws and the finished washers provided, fasten the end of the insert into the transom. For our bow light cable, we simply ran it up through the bottom of the insert like so. And with that, we're done. So be sure to check out Specialty Marine's Instagram page for other such projects. You can be inspired with your own restoration and even have the chance to win gift cards. So special thanks to them for making beautiful restorations like this possible with their products.